Hi Chris.
Oh, hi Beth, how are we?
I'm pretty good, bit warm today.
Yeah, 39 degrees. We're stood here in the Vineyard, middle of the day,
Yep.
on the 9th of February.
Yes.
So what we thought we'd do in this talk, and one or two others, is just to sort of bring a bit of biochemistry to the Vineyard, to give some context to why we teach biochemistry in second year and why we think this topic is of relevance in this particular application, that of grape growing, and in another video we'll also go up to the winery, won't we Beth?
We will. So the first thing that comes to my mind when I walk down a row of vines like this is the wine that's going to come out of them, and then taking a step back as to how all the components of that wine have actually got there in
Absolutely.
the first place.
And as a biochemist first in my life, and then as a wine person second in terms of the chronology, for me one of the great excitements about wine is that what I'm drinking is a whole load of biochemical components that have been arrived at, you can edit that bit out, that have been arrived at by a range of biochemical and metabolic processes. But they're all starting out here today in a vineyard like this, with leaves, sunshine, the anatomy of the vine, and then the bunches of grapes themselves. And that's what we'll talk a little bit about as we go through, won't we, Beth?
We will. And I think one of the most critical things to all biochemical reactions, which feels extremely relevant today, is the water.
Yeah.
Water is one of those beautiful solvents that allows so many reactions to happen. And without the water that is going onto these vines, and we can see it, you probably can't on the video there, but these vines are being watered as we speak, obviously because it is extremely hot today. So without that water, the key process of photosynthesis wouldn't be happening, and we all know that photosynthesis, the product of photosynthesis, is ultimately sugar, and that sugar is being transported directly into the grape berries, basically as we speak.
Yep, and that is probably the most wonderful piece of biochemistry that there ever was. Taking essentially the energy from the light that is making us bright out here today and converting that energy into stored chemical energy that we know in the form of sugars. And that's happening in every one of these millions of leaves right here in front of us now, through a process that involves energy, electrons, electron carriers, and of course a whole range of biochemical molecules called proteins, and a particular form of protein called enzymes. And we'll be talking about those in the first few weeks of the course. Thinking about it today, I'm standing here, Beth's standing here, it's nearly 40 degrees. If we stood kind of unprotected for any period of time, we would stop functioning as biological organisms. These vines are out here 24 hours of the day. Doesn't matter what the weather's like, doesn't matter how hot it is, they are still functioning. And that's a remarkable feature in itself, in that on a hot day, a bunch of grapes, the temperature of the bunch inside the berry can be 50 degrees Celsius. Now, if you heated me up so that my inside temperatures were 50, I'd be dead. I couldn't function, and I certainly wouldn't spring back and make grape wine if you then squashed me all up. But that's what grapes do, that's what all plants have to do. So they have mechanisms around their biochemistry to help them survive in these amazingly hot conditions. And as Beth said, a huge part of that all comes down to the water relations of the vine, doesn't it, Beth?
It does. And I think the other thing that's really critical in how plants in particular cope with being sedentary, they can't run away or protect themselves from extreme weather events, is their ability to change their chemical composition. So for example, you mentioned proteins, Chris, and how important they are. Just in the cellular structure of each of the cells within the leaves and the berries, the plants have the ability to change their composition, to change the proportion of lipids in their membranes, to change the types of proteins within their membranes. And one of those really key proteins, which are so important for all plants, but particularly plants in Australian environments, are a specialised sort of protein called an aquaporin. And those aquaporins create a channel through the cell membrane which allows water to travel much faster into the cell than it would just by diffusion.
Indeed. Now I'm going to rip one of these bunches off at risk of annoying our viticulturists, but as you can see, there we go. This is a bunch of, these are actually Shiraz grapes, and a few weeks ago they were green and they were hard and they were very tannic, and essentially at that point the seed inside was not ready to be dispersed, whereas now the berries, as many of you would know, have gone through a process called veraison, and the berries are now in a much more attractive form in terms of the agent that will disperse the berry, which is some kind of bird, and then they will discard the seed and that will grow. From a winemaking perspective, what's happened, of course, is that berry has changed colour and the berry has started to fill with sugar, and some of the acids in the berry have been broken down, and the energy that's released in that way, we now believe, serves as a little sort of metabolic buffer between two periods of the berry's development. But the sugars, of course, are really important, because those are the things that the yeast convert to alcohol, and they weren't here 4 or 5 weeks ago. They are now here, and they are here now, and in a few weeks' time when these vines are harvested, there will be huge amounts of sugar in here. 240, 250 grams per litre of sugar inside each one of these berries. And of course, we've also had what we call specialist metabolism, or specialised metabolism, edit that bit, whereby the berry skin has gone from a green colour to a red colour. Now of course that's really important from a winemaking perspective. It's also believed that's what tells the birds that these berries are worth flying down for and pecking and picking and taking away. Until that point the seed inside is not ready. So we've got some different metabolisms, some different biochemicals being made at different times in the development of the berry. So that means enzymes that are present in this berry here, making its skin red, they weren't present a few weeks ago, and their activity now is responsible for changing this from green colour to red colour. And then all the sugar inside, that is being metabolized as well. That's being made elsewhere on the vine. It's not made in the berries, it's translocated or moved into the vine from the leaves, where it's made through, as a process of photosynthesis, through the trunk, and then from the trunk mostly back up into the berries. So the bunch we see today and the bunch that we'll harvest and make wine from has itself undergone a range of biochemical changes through the natural development cycle.
And of course that's not limited to the berries. The leaves and the rest of the biomass of the plant are also going through those different biochemical processes. So obviously these leaves here, they look fairly young, they're fairly fresh, they're going to be very actively photosynthesizing. If we look at some leaves that are closer to the trunk, there's a nice yellow one somewhere, which will have gone through some parts of senescence. So we can see once the leaf starts to yellow like this, it's no longer performing that photosynthetic role, and any of the nutrients tied up in that leaf will have been remobilized and used somewhere else in the plant.
So there you are. You're sitting in biochemistry lecture, April or May, thinking, oh God, why do we need to know this stuff? Think back to a glorious hot summer's day in February, where biochemistry is responsible for converting sunlight to wine.